From your local election headquarters, here is This Week in Louisiana Politics.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Fred Childers. Hope you're having a great weekend. I want to thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. We have a jam-packed show, so let's get to it. We have two big political stories we've been following this week. The big redistricting battle that played out at the U.S. Supreme Court, and related, the special session happening here in Louisiana. Let's start there. Governor Jeff Landry called that special session on Thursday. It's set to begin this Thursday and run through November 13th. According to the governor's announcement, the special session will address actions related to the 2026 election, including laws, dates, deadlines, and funding. And that development came on the heels of Louisiana's Attorney General going to Washington this week for the landmark redistricting case, as the Supreme Court is once again hearing arguments over Louisiana's congressional map, a case that could have major consequences for political power across the country. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson reports.
Outside of the U.S. Supreme Court, the fight over voting rights was front and center.
Black voters in Louisiana, not just in Louisiana, but across the country, have the opportunity to establish that they do deserve fair and equal representation.
Inside, justices heard arguments over Louisiana's congressional map. The state argues it's unconstitutional because it added a second majority black district. That change happened after a lawsuit claimed the original map diluted black voters' power. Louisiana Democratic Congressman Troy Carter says overturning that map would reverse years of progress.
The Voting Rights Act is as needed today as it was when it was created.
A group of voters challenged that new map, and in turn, Louisiana's Republican-led government now sides with them.
And it's no longer proper to basically be using race to draw districts. That is what happened here.
Conservative justices questioned whether race could be a factor in map making, while liberals warned that limiting it could further weaken the Voting Rights Act.
Race-based remedies are permissible for a period of time. What exactly do you think the endpoint should be, or how would we know for the intentional use of race to create districts?
Race is a part of redistricting, always.
The court is expected to make a decision next year that could reshape congressional maps ahead of the 2026 midterms. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
And Congressman Cleo Fields, who represents that second black majority district now, appears hopeful the justices will side with the current map. Here's what he had to say.
It's going to be broad implications across the country. And there are a lot of voting rights districts, not only on the congressional level, but on the legislative level, the city council, school board. I'm just not being biased. I think the Legal Defense Fund did a very good job in arguing the case and the need to keep subsection 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
And the layout of Fields' seat also causing confusion among local candidates. Veronica Jones, the newly elected 19th Judicial District Court judge, says some of her constituents were unsure whether they could vote in that election. Here's what she had to say.
I joined 2 of the other candidates in a lawsuit to keep the district the same. As you know, I filled the seat that Wilson Fields left vacant when he went to the First Circuit. So we took the position that the map should have stayed the same, that the same electorate that elected him should be the same people that elected his replacement.
Jones will finish out the final 13 months of the term for Judge Wilson Fields, which ends in December 2026. Fields is now a judge at the First Circuit Court of Appeal. Some community members worry about losing a congressional ally if the second black majority district is lost. Speaking with the Associated Press, several political leaders said Democratic Representative Cleo Fields is a voice for black Louisianans. Mansfield Mayor Thomas Jones Jr., EBR Representative Denise Marcel, and Baton Rouge Councilmember Cleve Dunn Jr. all say they're worried about the court's decision. Our D.C. Bureau caught up with Governor Jeff Landry about his thoughts on the case before the Supreme Court. Here's what he had to say.
Look, I'm hoping that this case is going to be the final stop for Louisiana in the legacy of cases that Louisiana has been before the Supreme Court on redistricting matters. We've spent over $40 million since 2012 on congressional redistricting cases. That's $40 million that we can't spend in our classrooms, on our teachers, on our infrastructure. And it's time for the court to answer the question. The state has been caught in between the Voting Rights Act and the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And there's no win for us unless the court gives us a clear indication on how we can draw lines.
And we're waiting for that answer. The governor went on to say he's hopeful the court will make a final decision on this case after the court declined to make a ruling, and that happened back in June. New Orleans, meanwhile, making history with the election of Helena Moreno as the city's next mayor. Moreno taking the reins in the midst of a political scandal involving incumbent mayor LaToya Cantrell and the possibility of National Guard troops patrolling major cities.
Obviously, public safety is a top priority of mine. I certainly wouldn't be in support of any type of military takeover of our city.
A swearing-in ceremony is set for January. Moreno is the city's first Latina and second woman elected to that office. And let's head back out to the governor. Our D.C. bureau asked Governor Landry during that interview what new updates he could share about when we will see the Guard deployed.
We've been putting plans in place, talking to the Department of War. We're hoping that we'll see the troops in Louisiana or activated in Louisiana around Thanksgiving. Again, the purpose of that is to be a force multiplier to our law enforcement out there. Look, I learned on New Year's Day during that terrorist attack the value of having the National Guard. I called up 200 National Guardsmen to help secure one of the largest crime scenes in America at the time. And the city of New Orleans has been under a federal consent decree, and a federal judge has been controlling it. And it's left the city of New Orleans 700 police officers short. And so what we're hoping to do is augment that shortage with the National Guard, and then also use them in other cities that seem to have a very violent crime rate.
Governor Landry says the deployment locations will be decided based on which areas have the highest crime rates. New Orleans and Baton Rouge officials report having low violent crime numbers despite having fewer police officers. Coming up in this week in Louisiana politics, the federal government shutdown has far-reaching implications. What lawmakers are doing to help military members in our state. Plus, 70 years since the landmark Brown versus Board of Education case, its impact on Louisiana schools. Next. And looking ahead to next week, the major issues affecting Louisiana you need to know about. Stick around for more after the break.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. Now that the state's biggest city has a new mayor, how will her office work with the city council to correct budget concerns? WGNO's Ashley Hamilton spoke with a New Orleans professor who warns of more funding cuts.
Budget hearings continued on Wednesday amid a financial crisis for the city of New Orleans. According to Louisiana Legislative Auditor Michael Wagensbeck's report, the projected deficit is $160 million.
$47 million on a close to $1 billion general fund budget is really running tight. In a hurricane-prone area, you probably need to have a little more because, with the restructuring in FEMA and who knows what will happen with federal resources.
However, $37 million is restricted and cannot be appropriated as the other $8 million is to cover expenses. Wagensback says the spending deficit began to increase in 2023. According to the Finance Department, the council was made aware ahead of time that a possible deficit was on the horizon, which council members say is false.
What you're telling me is that we provide a 100-page report by council request that you don't read.
We get the report after the fact. The money's already been spent by the time we got it.
Okay.
We can't stop that from happening. The administration stops that from happening. And in fact, the reason why we had the meeting in January is because we saw what the numbers were. We're the ones who raised that issue, not y'all.
Going forward, Wagensback recommends actual reports that show the actual spending amount from the system be done monthly.
What was supposed to be budgeted and put into the brass system, and just a realistic budget to actual so that you can address this deficit spending.
Though Councilman J.P. Morrell took it a step further, stating to ensure this doesn't happen again, it's best if they made the budget more like a regular legislative one.
Whenever you want to move money around, whenever you want a deficit spend, there has to be a public hearing saying, where's the money going to come from?
All right, the next budget hearing is set for Monday, with the mayor's office expected to speak first. Voters across our state had several options on their ballot this past weekend. Let's take a look. Natchitoches Parish voting down a proposed increase in property taxes. Caddo Parish, meanwhile, approving all 3 propositions for one of their fire districts. And Bossier Parish has a new police juror. Republican Lynn Beatty will take over the seat following the passing of longtime juror Bob Brotherton. A special task force of state lawmakers met in Baton Rouge earlier in the week to identify better solutions for protecting children across the state. Since the legislature is not in session, the hearing was more of a formality. State Senator Regina Barrow, who leads the task force, says they need clearer answers on who takes the lead when abuse is reported and how different agencies can work together. The state's Supreme Court suspends a Jefferson Parish judge. The judge found Chick Ferret used profanities during a 2022 murder trial. He's also accused of showing bias in a 2021 insurance claims case and in a 2022 class action lawsuit. The court ruled that those incidents showed willful misconduct and suspended Ferret without pay for 30 days. There's still no end in sight to the government shutdown, but Senate Republicans are trying to move forward with other legislation to fund parts of the government long-term, and that includes military pay. Washington correspondent Kristen Eskow has the story.
The stalemate on Capitol Hill continues, with the short-term funding bill failing in the Senate for the 10th time.
The motion is not agreed to.
And tensions are high.
Until we get the government operating again and we stop holding, I get very upset about that. We stop holding the American people hostage for these ridiculous political games.
Aside from the short-term spending bill, Senate Republicans are trying to move ahead with their long-term budget legislation. Senate Majority Leader John Thune tried to hold a preliminary vote to advance a bill to fund the Pentagon for the next year, which would ensure military members get paid.
If we can't reopen the entire government, we can at least make some progress toward securing paychecks for our troops.
The bill received bipartisan support when it passed out of committee, but Democrats did not provide the votes needed on the floor for now, arguing other parts of the government should also be funded at the same time.
It's always been unacceptable to Democrats to do the defense bill without other bills that have so many things that are important to the American people in terms of health care, in terms of housing, in terms of safety.
Vote in the Senate could happen as early as Monday. The House remains in recess. Coming up, honoring the pioneers behind Brown versus the Board of Education, the history of its impact on Louisiana schools. Rouge and beyond. We'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. We're continuing to get more perspective on the redistricting case. There's still no telling how the U.S. Supreme Court will rule. Meanwhile, many across our state and the nation are expressing concerns for what a ruling could mean for minority voices. WGNO's Rain Augustine has more.
If you strike down Section 2 of the VRA, we will not have a representative form of government because some voices will not be represented.
Louisiana versus Calais, the congressional redistricting case challenging the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
The Voting Rights Act is not just necessary today, but also for our future.
The Supreme Court's argument focuses on Louisiana's congressional map, but the outcome may set a precedent for how districts are drawn in every state, thus impacting 2026 midterm elections.
We cannot allow the gains that people lived and died to acquire to be eviscerated by a Trump Supreme Court.
President of the New Orleans chapter of the Power Coalition for Equality and Justice, Norris Henderson, says minority districts should have equal and fair representation.
Based upon the rules in Congress that, you get representation based upon your population.
After once defending the congressional map in question, Attorney General Liz Murrill now says she believes the map has led to confusion.
The court needs to clarify its precedent, and it needs to create a workable system for legislatures to be able to do their jobs and comply with the Constitution.
Meanwhile, groups like the Congressional Black Caucus pose this question to the United States Supreme Court.
Does racism still exist in the United States of America to the extent that we need a Voting Rights Act to protect people of color, not just black people?
Yes.
All people of color.
All right, and we should point out, Attorney General Liz Murrill has said, in fact, on this show, while her office was obligated to defend the map initially, they've never backed away from the conviction that race-based redistricting is unconstitutional. Again, that ruling is expected next year, but it could come at any time. Open enrollment has begun for Medicaid patients. This comes amid concerns over increases in premiums. The deadline is December 7th. Governor Landry has placed a temporary pause on new carbon capture applications, saying the 45-day moratorium will give locals and officials time to ensure all applications are following state regulations. Now, the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry spoke out against the move, writing in part, quote, "It sends the wrong message. The order risks ceding Louisiana's competitive advantage to neighboring states eager to move forward with CCS investments." Former Governor John Bel Edwards says he will not run for the U.S. Senate, despite some speculation. The race is currently crowded with Republican challengers hoping to unseat Republican incumbent Senator Bill Cassidy. It will be the first statewide election since Louisiana switched to a closed primary system. That election is next fall. Bessie approves reducing the number of standardized tests for high school students. Going forward, students are required to take 4 assessments instead of 6. Students will also only take 1 comprehensive exam instead of 2 for English, language, arts, and math. Brown versus the Board of Education made lasting impacts here in Louisiana, like desegregating many schools that we all know of today. Deshaun Johnson shares a piece of that history.
4 of the many African-American students who made history in Baton Rouge are retelling their story.
I decided it was something I had to do.
Freya Anderson Rivers was the first African-American girl to walk into the desegregated Lee High, which is now Liberty High, and was the first African-American woman to go to LSU.
I'm still alive, and most of the children that you meet think that this happened way before, during Abraham Lincoln and all. So to see somebody that's alive and that has gone through all of this makes a difference.
Rivers, like her peers, went through a lot during the process of desegregation. Some were sent to Baton Rouge High, others to Glen Oaks High. Rivers says at the time, things were different. But now, she says she worries for the future.
During the time of segregation in 1963-64, we made a big difference. Black city employees were hired for the first time. There were many jobs opened up. It made a big difference then. But when I look at today, it's been reversed and everything is going backwards.
During the panel, Rivers and others said it was important to reshare the history behind Baton Rouge and how it came to be, saying this should be an eye-opener for the youth that walk through those same doors.
Many people don't know about the history, and that's why it is necessary. But the important thing is for the youth to know their history so that they can plan for the future.
All right, up next, we'll have a look at the week ahead on your local election headquarters. Stay with us.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. Let's look ahead to the coming week. On Monday, Morgan Lamondre, CEO of the Sexual Trauma and Response Organization, known as STAR, will be the guest speaker at the Press Club of Baton Rouge. He'll discuss changes in federal and state funding there. And at the Capitol, the task force on protecting Louisiana's critical infrastructure from foreign adversaries will meet on Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning. On that same day, also at the Capitol, the Health Disparities in Rural Areas Task Force will meet, and that'll happen at 10 a.m. Thank you so much for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. Stay informed, and I'll see you next week right here on your local election headquarters.